Welcome to Perennia's 6th webinar of the Preparing for Retail Success series provided to you by our Agri-Food Funding Program. Today's topic will be Pricing for Profit, Part 3. My name is Emily Page, and I'm a food scientist with Perennia Food and Agriculture. We offer a wide array of services to support Nova Scotia's agriculture and seafood sectors, such as food safety, agricultural extension, mobile wine bottling, and analytical testing of cannabis, foods, and beverages. At the Perennia Food and Beverage Innovation Center, we work with clients on product development, process improvement, nutritional labeling, and shelf life determination. First, I would like to introduce our guest presenter, Peter Chapman of SKUFood. Peter understands the food industry, and he works hard to figure out where it is going. His experience includes both sides of the desk. Prior to working with suppliers and launching SKUFood, Peter worked for 19 years with Canada's largest food retailer, Loblaw. He is committed to using this experience to help producers and processors understand retailers and consumers. Peter is the author of A la Carte and has provided food industry insights to Canadian Grocer, The Globe and Mail, Maclean's Magazine, and Canada AM. Lastly, just a quick Zoom housekeeping notes. If you have a question during the session, please use the Q&A button, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom window at any time. And with that, I will pass it off to you, Peter.
Great, thanks very much, Emily, and excited to be here today to share some insights into pricing, which is definitely one of the biggest challenges sometimes for food producers and processors, is just how to price your product right so that it delivers the return that you need in your business, but also is competitive in the marketplace and delivers the right sales volume for you in the marketplace with your customers and with consumers. And it's an interesting challenge trying to figure out pricing. And what I want to do today as well is share just a little bit of sort of some of the insights that I can bring to you as well from my time working with Loblaw companies on the retail side, because obviously the retailer, if you're in that channel, the retailer is the one who's going to set the price. And so I can give you some insights into how they look at things and how retails get set. So we're going to really try to focus on some of the different pieces that go together. So we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the different ways products can be priced. And I know last week in the session, Gary covered a lot on sort of more the cost-based pricing model. So we're not going to recover that, but just it is something that's important to note. Then we're going to talk about a category review. I'm going to talk to you about how to look at what you see in the store and understand where that is going and how that can impact you picking the right price for your products. We're going to talk about retail margins, because obviously the profit, the gross margin that the retailer is going to need to make on your product is going to impact the final retail price, but it also can impact your costs or your selling price to the retailer. So we're going to talk about that, and then finally get into really how do you set that price for your product. So one of the things that's always important to remember with pricing is it's a great combination of art and science. There is no clear formula, in my opinion, that says this is exactly how to price your product or this is exactly the right price. Now, there is some math that we need to do. You need to have a great understanding of your own cost of goods. You need to understand what it really costs you to do some of the different things in our business. And sometimes we lose sight of that. We kind of get, well, I'm going to do it, or I'm going to drop it off, or I'm going to do that. And we don't apply a true cost to that. And that's part of the growth and evolution of a business. But there are a lot of really important costs that you need to understand and also understand the retail side, like what the price and the margins. So there is some math. And then on the art side of it, it's looking at saying, where do you fit within the category? And if you're going to be higher priced than some, then how much higher can you be? And how do you justify that? How do you explain the benefits of your product well enough that consumers go, oh, okay, it's worth an extra 80 cents? Or if you're going to be less, then how do you drive that home so that you can deliver the volume you need to get the economies of scale. So pricing really is art and science, and it's important to bring both of those together. And again, I just want to reinforce as well what Emily said. With regards to questions, if you have some questions, that's what this is all about. I mean, we definitely try really hard to put together the right content for you to explain these things. But if there's something that you're saying, Peter, what are you talking about? Or why are you explaining it that way? By all means, that's what we're here for. So I always encourage you to put those in, and we will definitely address them through the session today. So one of the things I wanted to ask you right up front is, what should determine the price that you sell your products for? What are the different factors? And we've put some of them. We're going to do a poll here. So I'm really interested in your perspective on what are the different things that you should consider when you're pricing your products. So we did give you some options, and it's a multiple choice. So you can pick whichever ones apply to you, not just one. So is it your cost of goods? Is it the price of the competing products on the shelf? Is it the profit that you need to make in your business? Is it the cost of promotion programs? Is it the retailer's margins? Perhaps there's something else that you also consider. So I'm really interested to see how people are looking at pricing before we get into some of the content here this morning. So if you want to just select whichever ones apply to you, and then we'll take a look, because it's always important for me, especially when we're not in the same room, that we do have an opportunity to kind of get a little bit of a sense of what you're thinking and what you see as important. So hopefully, Emily, you're seeing some results come in there, and we can at some point share those results so we can take a look and just kind of understand what people see as the important factors for when they're setting their price.
Yep. I'll leave it open for another 30 seconds, and then we'll share the results here.
Okay. And I see a note in the chat already, so that's great. We appreciate that, and it's interesting to get people's perspectives, because pricing, there are different ways to do this. There's no doubt about it, and we definitely are interested to sort of see what people think. And maybe, I don't think that the polling function in Zoom is this advanced, but perhaps we should have done like a weighted average to see whether you think that half of the price is your cost of goods and that kind of thing. So let's see, we've got some results there. So 3/4 of the people are saying that their cost of goods is an important factor when determining your price, and 50% are saying the price of competing products. 71% say that it's the profit in their business. So a lot of maybe a little more focus on what's going on in your business than some of the external factors, but 12% have the promotion program. That one there, I'd argue with you. I think that's an important thing to factor in. And one of the things which I see a lot sometimes is that people don't sort of plan that part of it out well enough. So I would really encourage you to consider the cost of what you have to do to get your product off the shelf and into the shopping cart. So retailers' margins, 1/3 of you, or 29%, are saying that's something. And I think if you're going to sell in the retail environment, that definitely is something that you need to consider. And I'd definitely be interested into what the 18% other factors are. So if you did select other, I'd be interested if you just put it in the chat, maybe what you see as being some other factors that perhaps we didn't give you on the poll. But so thank you for sharing that. And I would agree with the comment in the chat. I think all of those factors are things that you should consider when you're determining the right retail or the right price for selling your products. So thank you for participating in the poll. And if you do, those people who did put the other, so somebody I see put demand and supply. So that's interesting. And I think in some instances, certainly supply and demand does impact pricing, and more on the commodity side, probably, for sure. I think that's a good point for sure. And we're going to actually talk about sort of market-based pricing. So one of the things which I always want you to remember, and when you're going to price your products, is that any shelf is not the right shelf. And if you've developed a a premium product that's really designed to be priced, higher than some of the other products in the category, then getting your product into a discount store, for example, that's not the right shelf for you. That's not the right place. And you're going to end up having to either reduce your price or do so much promotion and discount to bring the price down to closer to the category that it's not going to be probably that beneficial for you. So I think as you're looking and growing your business, or even looking at your existing complement of customers, we have to kind of remember that any shelf is not the right shelf. It's really important to think back to who's your target market and where are you going to find these people. And I know sometimes it's so exciting, and we should celebrate when we get listings and have a retailer who wants to put us on the shelf. But we just have to make sure that you're putting the focus into the shelf where you have the best opportunity to generate your sales. Because if not, you're probably going to get pulled off your game to sell your product. So as we go through this, I'm going to come back to that point a few times as well. So to give you an example of this, I just want you to consider what the Sobeys business looks like. So, and we're going to use that throughout as well today as we talk about pricing and margins and different things. So this is Freshco, which is Sobeys discount banner. We don't have any of them here in Atlantic Canada, but you would certainly see lots of Freshco stores in Ontario, and they're expanding this banner out into Western Canada as well. So this is a discount banner. So the whole philosophy of a discounter is to take a lot of costs out of the business from the retailer's perspective, so they can charge lower margins at the shelf. They want to drive a lot of volume because they're making less cents per unit profit. So they got to drive more volume. It's got to be a high volume per square foot kind of model. They don't want a lot of shrink, and they want products that are going to turn fast for them. So that's a discount model. And that may be right for your products. If that's what your products are designed for, then discount is a channel where you can have a lot of success. And that's a growing channel within the Canadian retail landscape. So then there's Sobeys conventional stores. So these stores have more cost built into them. They have more labor built into them. The listing base would be bigger. So if you go into, say, the produce department, perhaps in a discounter, you might find maybe 200 SKUs, 225 SKUs. And in a conventional store or traditional store, you're probably going to find closer to 300 SKUs. So there's, that difference in SKUs makes a lot of difference in the economics to them. So it's a different kind of model. And if your products are built for that conventional shopper, where perhaps you need a little bit of selling from one of the people in the store or something like that, then that conventional shelf is the right shelf for your products. And then if we think about more that sort of specialty market, which would probably be kind of the upper tier of the market. And Sobeys, if you've been in their Farm Boy stores in Ontario, which is a chain that they purchased within the last few years, great stores, really neat stores, offer a lot of prepared foods, a lot of their own Farm Boy products. And if you've ever been to the US, they're a little bit like a Trader Joe's kind of feel to them, but really good stores. And again, a different model, probably a smaller footprint store, so they have room for less items, not as many grocery items, but maybe in say a category like ketchup, they might have kind of a regular listing and then maybe kind of a premium or a gourmet or a flavored or something like that. So it's a different kind of model again, and that may be exactly what's a great spot for you to find a home for your product. So just remember, when you're thinking about pricing, you can't drive your product into the format if it doesn't fit the format. And we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the economics of the formats, but it's just when you're looking to find that right shelf, think through, okay, who's my target market? And the target market for Sobeys in these three banners is very different, right? The Freshco shopper is different than the Sobeys shopper is different than the Farm Boy shopper. So it's you just want to think through those kind of things. And as you go across that page from one banner to the other, their costs increase, so they have to charge higher margins. That's just the way the economic model works for them. So just remember that when you're going to price your products. Now, the first thing we're going to do is talk about market-based pricing. And before I do that, though, I do have a gift for you today, because we always got to bring gifts, right? I think it's important to do that. So if the first person who can put into the chat which store that is, which store it is, because I'm always a big advocate of saying you got to get out in the stores, you got to get into the stores. So if you can tell us which grocery store that is, doesn't have to be the specific city or town, but just which banner it is, which format it is, I will send you one of our SKUFood profit wheels. And this is a great tool that was developed to help you figure out the difference between gross margin and markup. And we have a great kit that kind of goes with it that explains how to use it and that kind of thing. So if you want to just try to enter in there, and I know Emily's going to keep an eye and let me know who the first person is who gets the correct answer. And I see the correct answer is already in there. So Emily, your job was, it happened pretty fast, obviously. So so the people who put it in, you're right, it is Farm Boy. So so congratulations for putting that in there. And those are great stores, which I would always encourage you. I know we can't travel right now, so if you're in a Farm Boy market, you can get in one, but if you're not, you're out of luck right now, but hopefully soon we'll be able to do that. So let's talk about market-based pricing. And really that is happening most often in perishable departments, and it's really about commodities. So we had the comment earlier about supply and demand, and it's really to understand, okay, what is the market price? Try to factor in any differences that you have, and then you're going to set your price. And that is one where you don't have as much ability to kind of explain sort of value added and some of those kind of different things and differentiate your product where it's in that more commodity kind of space. So we're not going to talk a lot about that. That's really more where you're going to produce a commodity, understand the market pricing, and then dictate that, or determine, negotiate the price with your customer. And again, happens mostly in produce, also in the meat department. So now we're going to talk about cost-based pricing. And this is the one that Gary spent a lot of time in pricing 2.0. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about it. But one of the things that I want you to remember again is that these different pricing models work in different places. So cost-based pricing for me works really well in a farm market environment. It works really well if you're selling direct to the consumer in your own, perhaps off your own facility, or if you're on the primary production side on your own farm, because they can't compare things. It's a different kind of a decision for the consumer. You can really look and say, okay, what are my costs and how do I determine the price? And I also believe there are some applications for cost-based pricing in the retail environment where they put you with not like products, but more products where they're produced in the same place. So at one time, this retailer, and actually I've got another profit wheel for the first person who can identify this store. So Emily, if you could watch the chat again. So I almost said what store it was, but I caught myself before I did. So if you can identify which store that is, which banner it is, then I do have another SKUFood profit wheel for that person. So if you want to put it into the chat, you can try to put that in there, and hopefully you get the first in the first guess. So I do see some correct answers, and the correct answer is Sobeys. So that was how Sobeys did their Atlantic program for a while, and it's not as prevalent to see it that way. But the reason I say cost-based pricing works here is because the consumer's not comparing you within a category. They're comparing you to other Atlantic items, other Atlantic produced items. So your retail price is more sort of compared to the things around you. So you can probably take more of a focus on saying, okay, my cost of goods and the markup and what it needs to be when it gets delivered. And to do this, and again, Gary did a great job last week, and I know that the recording is available for that, so you can watch that. And it's really starting with your cost of goods, understanding what your trade spend and your marketing spend, what you're going to spend on, promotion is going to be, understanding your overheads, the markup that you need, and then setting your price. And that's really how cost-based pricing works. But what we're going to focus on today is really more about what I call price-based pricing. And that's looking at what the retail is in the store, understanding where you need to be in the category to deliver the volume that you want to achieve. And so what we're going to do and we're going to use the salad dressing category that you see there on the screen, the refrigerated salad dressing category, as an example. And I'll take you through the different steps. And so in terms of price-based pricing, so using the retail price to try to figure out what your price should be, is that we're going to start with a category review. And this is something that, if I go back to my retail days, this is the way we would look at the category. This is how your customer, the category manager, this is how they're looking at the category. So we're going to take a snapshot and try and look at it that way. Then we're going to determine what's the right price within the category for our product. Then we're going to look at what the margins are that the retailer is going to need to make. We're going to factor in what distribution model that we're going to use. And then we're going to say, okay, that's the price. That's where we need to be. And then we can compare it to what's going on in your own business. So it's coming at the pricing model from a different angle. And I'm just going to take a break for a second, Emily, and see if we've got any questions, because we kind of covered 3 different ways to look at pricing your products. That market-based pricing, so looking at commodity markets and understanding where the commodity market price is. Then we looked at that cost-based pricing, where you take all of your costs and sort of build the price up to get to that selling price. And then now we're looking at it from the other end, saying, look at the retail price and kind of work it backwards. So I don't see any questions or anything. So I'm going to keep going. Again, if you have any, by all means, certainly we'll keep an eye on that and make sure we watch for them. So a category review. So what does that mean? And you know, what are we talking about? So the first thing you need to do is you have to spend some time in the store to do this. And you just want to go down and you want to look at the category and make a list of all of the products that you see on the shelf, because this is how the consumer is going to see it. And it's important to remember that, you know, the consumer does make a lot of decisions at the shelf. So let's look at all of the different factors. And some of them may not be 100% comparable to your product, but we need to list them all and consider them. Then we're going to calculate the equivalent price, because a lot of people will do some of that math. You know, if the bottle size or the box size is different, we need to convert it to an equivalent price. And that's as much so that you can understand it. And probably your customer, the category manager, they spend a lot of time at looking at equivalent prices. That's something that they definitely want to try to get so that it's comparable in their mind. Then we're going to consider the differences. And there are always differences in products. Some of them mean more than others. So there are things like organic versus conventional. There could be where it's produced. It could be things like something that probably means more now than it did maybe 5 years ago is what type of packaging are we using? Is it something that we can tell a story about sustainable packaging? That kind of thing. So what are the differences? And then we try to say, okay, what is that worth? And then we'll look and we'll say, okay, if we could pick a price based on your product compared to the other ones on the shelf that you're going to compete with, then what is that right price for your products? So that's really how you calculate price-based pricing. It's looking at the retails that are on the shelf and looking and saying, okay, what do we think is really the, you know, where do we need to be? And then let's work it backwards. So if we look at the refrigerated dressing category, you can see that, I know it's probably hard from the photo that was on your screen, but I've tried to do some of the work for you here. So up in the top left, there was a number of SKUs of a Bolthouse organic dressing, which retailed for $5.99, and it was a 355 ml bottle. And it's interesting to me that that bottle was 355 ml, because a lot of times we see sometimes in sort of the premium that it would be a smaller bottle. And but that's that was the decision that Bolthouse had at the time. And so that works out to per 100 ml $1.69. And you can see the rest of the products are all listed there. You've got a Lighthouse organic, which retails for $4.99. So there's a whole $1 gap between the Bolthouse and the Lighthouse for the same size SKU, which is interesting when you're looking at the category. Then we've got Opa, which is a slightly unique product because they're made with Greek yogurt. So they actually have a bit of a premium because they've got a smaller bottle for that $4.99 retail. And then you can see there are sort of more what I'll call the regular SKUs in the categories, some from Lighthouse, some from Renee's, and some are more cream-based, like a ranch or Caesar. And then there are other ones that are oil-based, sort of an oil and vinegar or a raspberry balsamic, and some of those types of SKUs. So you can see $4.99 is the base retail in the category. So when we're looking at where our product is going to fit from a retail perspective, we want to look and say, okay, compared to the other products in the category, are we, a little bit better than some of those? What are some of the differences? So let's just take a look, and I kind of made up a product so that we could go through this example. So what I'm saying is that our product has some unique flavors. And so it's not a Me Too item. We're bringing some unique things to the market. So perhaps we have a maple balsamic, which is made with maybe real syrup, or maybe we've got a wild blueberry vinaigrette, which we don't see from the other processors in the category. So we have some unique flavors. So that probably gives us some kind of a little bit of an edge. Excuse me. The next thing is that olive oil is our first ingredient. And if you look at a lot of these dressings, water is the first ingredient. So that's another point of differentiation for us, but it also increases our cost of goods because olive oil obviously is way more expensive than water. Then we're made in Canada. So that differentiates us a little bit. Bolthouse is made in the US, Lighthouse is made in the US, Renee's is a bit of a Canadian success story, now part of Kraft. So I'm not sure that consumers would maybe give it as much credit for sort of being the Canadian success story that it was when it was an independent product, but it is made in Canada. So out of the category, we're sort of about half are made in Canada. So we can tell that story somewhat. We're not organic, we're made with conventional ingredients, and we have a slightly smaller bottle because that was the right size that fit with what we were trying to do. So we're going with a 310 ml bottle. So when I factor all those different things in and look at the category, I'm saying we want to be about $5.79. That's the retail that I feel will be about right. We're a little bit below the Bolthouse Organics, but we're above the rest of those sort of $4.99s in the category. And this is where the art part comes in. You could argue with me and say, Peter, we should be $5.49. You could argue with me and say, Peter, we need to be $6.49 because we've got more differences. That's the art part of where pricing, where I say it's a combination of art and science. So if you look at how we stack up on an equivalent basis, you can see we're the most expensive in the category, but by pricing at $5.79, we're still not the highest retail price. So it's important to factor all those things in and try to figure out. So we're going to go with the $5.79. Again, you might argue with me, and that's fair enough, but we're going to go with the $5.79. And one thing you might be thinking, Peter, why are we, we really have to focus on our own costs. And when we did that poll at the beginning, and you told me that your own cost of goods and the profit that you need to make are the most important factors, and I agree, you need to run your business. But we do need to understand what's going on at the shelf. And I just want to share this quote, and P&G, obviously a very successful consumer packaged goods. And actually, to be honest, during my Loblaw career, I had the opportunity to hear A.G. Lafley speak he actually came to one of our Loblaw meetings and spoke, and he was a really articulate and interesting person. I really enjoyed the opportunity to listen to him. But one of the things that he said recently is more and more of our communication is moving to store. The reason it's moving to store is that more and more consumers are making their purchase decisions in store. So you have to remember, people are looking at that category and they're saying, okay, well, what am I going to buy? They're standing in front of it, they're comparing the options, and then they're making a decision. So before we get into the math, I do see there are a couple of questions here. So I'm just going to have a look at them and go through them. So with price-based pricing, it looks like you're backwards engineering the cost. That might affect quality to meet that price. No. And that's true. It is backwards engineering. I think that's a good way to look at it. And when we get to the point where we look and say, okay, what is the cost? What is the price that you're going to sell it for? Sometimes there are things that we can look at in our business, and we have different ingredients, different cost components in packaging. And when I tell you what the price that you need to sell it to hit the retail, then you say, well, is that the right cost? Are there things that we can change? That kind of thing. So you're right. It is something where I would challenge some of the cost components. Now you have to maintain the integrity of your product. That's your role as a producer, processor. It's your brand, it's your product. And I'm not telling you to compromise that. I'm just trying to explain to you, when you bring a selling price to the table, what's going to happen to it. And then the second question is there a difference in the retail store's view if the product is plastic or glass? I think it depends on the retailer, and certain retailers are putting more focus on sustainable packaging. Other ones, maybe they're not along that continuum as far. So again, that's about finding that right shelf. So if you feel that you're paying a premium for a certain type of packaging, but there's a sustainable story that you can share and that it's worth something to you, then I think that that's definitely something that you want to, you want to find those right customers for that. So thanks very much for your questions. And we're going to keep going, but we will take a pause again and see if we have any more. So let's look at the math. And this is the formula. So when you're trying to figure out your selling price, you just want to understand it's the retail price times 1 minus the gross margin that the retailer is going to make in the category. So in this case, the gross margin that the retailer is going to want to make in the produce department is 45%. And we picked $5.79 for our sort of target retail. So what that's going to tell us now is that $5.79 times 1 minus 0.45, or $5.79 times 0.55, is that our selling price would come in at $3.18. So that's what we would need to sell the product to the retailer for if they're going to retail it at $5.79. So that's how you sort of do the math, and you can figure it out by looking at the category. So a lot of times people ask me the question, Peter, I don't know the category margins. So I understand that. And that's a little bit of an important issue that you need to know if you're going to look at sort of the price-based pricing model. So I'm going to share with you some category margins, and these are not, I would say, state secrets from the retailers, but it's an important thing for you to know. And there are differences, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But overall, this is a good starting point for you. So if you're trying to sell something in the produce department, they're probably going to try to make a 45% gross margin. Some items are going to be less, some are going to be a little more, but that's the melded margin that they're going to try to achieve in that department. So meat more like 25%, deli 50% because they've got a lot of service. And then the whole meal replacement is more like 65%. That's like the prepared foods because there's a lot of shrink in that area. Seafood, 30%. Now there's a difference between frozen and fresh seafood, but it melds out around 30. The bakery department, usually around 50% because there's a lot of labor in there. Grocery, 25. And then in the natural food department, about 28. So again, it's not the same in every store, but that's a starting point for you when you're trying to sort of look and say, okay, the retail price is going to be this, the gross margin they're going to make is going to be X, and how to convert to get your costs. So those are some examples. Now we're going to take a break here. we're going to take a detour, because one thing that people often say to me, they get so frustrated. They go, Peter, why did the retailer have to make so much money? I'm making cents per unit and they're making 50% margin on my product. Like, it's not fair. So I just want to give you a little bit of why that is. And I'm not saying I'm not defending it. I'm just trying to give you the facts so that you can understand why it works out that way. So let's take an example. So I gave you those gross margins, and like I said, they're not in every store the same, but those are some good starting points for you. So why do they need to make these gross profit? Well, first they've got to cover the labor in the department. They got to cover the supplies that they're going to use. They also cover the ad investment out of that. So that's the shelf margin. So they'll invest some pricing in their weekly ad. They've got to cover shrink out of that. And that's different depending on the departments, higher in the fresh, low in grocery. And they're responsible for delivering a contribution budget, which then gets put into the store. And there are differences in margins. So if we look at Freshco, which would be the discounter, and I'm giving you produce just as an example, and it's fairly consistent across the departments about how it would be lower in the discount chain, because like I said, they're high volume and they try to strip the costs out so they can afford to be lower on margins. So in the discount produce department, they're probably trying to meld out around 35%. In that conventional Sobe store, probably about 45%. And in the Farm Boy, it might be just trying to sneak it a little bit higher because their volume is a little lower in the specialty channel and they've got to offer probably even more service. So those are just, again, some numbers to give you an indication. And then we look at what's called contribution. And so this is produce in that discount environment. And I'm just going to take you through a couple examples so you can see the differences. So the category margin, like I told you, is 35 in the discount. Their ad investment is about 6 points. They have about a 6.5% shrink in that produce department in discount. Their labor would be about 6%, and then they have some supplies, which would be about 1.5. So their contribution to running the total FreshCo business, because don't forget they have people at the office and warehouses and all those kind of things, their contribution in that produce department is about 15%. So you can see how it starts to kind of come down, and they're not really taking 35 points to the bank on your products if you're selling it in there. I'm just going to give you a little example of the difference. So here's what a more traditional, conventional store would look like: a higher margin. The ad investment's a little lower because they don't have as many specials as sort of deep discounts as a discounter would have. They have higher shrink because they have more items, and they have a higher labor number because they have to have more staff to take care of the products, and they probably have some components of service within that. So their contribution is about 19. And then you can see that in the specialty store, the numbers change again a little bit. The labor is a little higher and that kind of thing. So it's a different model depending on which shelf you're in. Now let's look at the total store, because you're still saying they're making a lot of money on my products. And so now we're going to go to the total store. This is not just the produce department. This is the total store. And you can see that the melded margin across the store is about 30%. They invest about 6 in the ad. They're going to have about a 3% shrink. They're going to have about a 6.5% labor number, 2% to cover fixed and variable costs. So the store makes about 12.5. Then you bring it down and you look at what they've got in the whole rest of the business. This is like the office and the warehouse and all that. So overheads, and they've got fixed and variable. They've got a distribution number to run the warehouse and the deliveries, which add up to about 11. So at the end of the day, the retailer is left with about 1.5%. Now, they have huge volume, which is massive, but it is only about a 1.5 to 2% business depending on the year. So I always like to try to explain that to people because they get so frustrated by the margins, and I understand your frustration, and that's why I try to explain it so you can see what those costs are there, or what that margin does deliver for them. So that's the end of our detour. We're going to get back to our price-based pricing model. And I do see there's a few more questions, but do you want me to take those now, Emily? Or
we can come back to a couple of them at the end, but there's one that I think will help people understand. So one person's asking, what is shrink? So they don't have that definition.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no
and
problem.
thank you for asking, because you throw these terms out, and so shrink is anything that the retailer buys that does not go through the cash register at the right price. So it could be something that doesn't, if it's a produce item, that it goes bad before they can sell it. It could be something that gets stolen. It could be something that gets rung in wrong because the UPC code is not right on it or anything. So it's anything that doesn't go through the cash register at the right price.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. We'll take the rest at the end to make sure we get through.
Okay, perfect. So we're at the end of our detour onto margins and store profitability. So let's get back to our price-based pricing model. So this is where we left it off, that we felt like $3.18 a unit was what the price should be or could be to that retailer. Then we need to factor in distribution. So how are we going to get that product to the store? And the 318 is built on delivering it to the warehouse. And when we're talking about the retail channel, we always need to think about pricing to a delivered price. So that's delivered to the warehouse, but you have options. You could use a distributor. You could do the direct store delivery yourself. So we're just going to quickly go through those. So 318 to the warehouse. But if you're going to do the direct store delivery yourself, then you can probably charge a little more because the retailer doesn't have to do the distribution of your product. So I told you it was about 6%. So we can add that back onto your price, and you could probably charge them closer to $3.37 if you were going to do your own distribution. Now, if you're going to use a distributor, you're going to have to pay that distributor to do their work for you. And so if, again, you go back to the direct store delivered price of $3.37, a distributor who's going to distribute your products, deliver it to the store, is going to probably charge you between 20 and 25%. And that's a markup. It's not margin, it's a markup. So if we take that off the price, then probably you have to sell that product to the distributor for about $2.70. They're going to mark it up 25% and deliver it to the store for $3.37. So there's different options depending on which distribution model you pick. And that's why it's important to really understand what is the best thing for my products to get it to that store that that you've identified as the right shelf for your product. And again, I'm going to reinforce to you, any shelf is not the right shelf, because you may go, well, I'm better in a specialty store and the economic model is the right one for me there, that kind of thing, because probably the prices in the category are going to be a little higher in that specialty store. Instead of, say, $5.99 for the Bolthouse Organic and $4.99 for the rest of the SKUs, if we looked at the conventional category, the specialty store category, we probably would see maybe $6.79 for Bolthouse and maybe $5.99 for the other items in the category. And you could say, okay, well, we could be $6.49, and you can change you can alter your selling price, because into that channel, it's a little different. So that's why it's so important to spend time looking at these categories. And when you're looking at that sort of price-based pricing model, the way that I looked at it for our product was, and I would encourage you to look at it for yours, is that, I decided I didn't want to be, and I couldn't be, the highest price in the category, because the Bolthouse Organic to me would have had a premium in the consumer's mind. We didn't have enough differences to sort of get over that retail pricing point. We were the most expensive per volume, but I think that the jar wasn't so small that people would really notice a huge difference. So it wasn't going to factor into it too much in the decision. And it's hard for the consumer to do that math, 355 mil, 310 mil, that's not easy math to kind of do when you're there. So the other thing, how are we going to market those points of differentiation? So if you go back to our example, we were olive oil first. We were made in Canada. We had some really interesting flavors. So we've got to really do a great job marketing those so that we justify that premium between $4.99 and $5.79 for our product. Consider your promo strategy. What are you going to have to spend and invest, whether it's social media or mass media, all the different things that you want to do. Maybe it's neck tags on your bottle to say olive oil first or something like that. What are you going to do, and what's it going to cost you? And then the most important thing, and that's why, again, I go back to that, you've got to find the right shelf, is that your product has to sell. It's a great accomplishment to get to the shelf, but your product has to sell to stay on the shelf. And that's why we need to know, what is our price relative to the competition that we're faced with in the category. So just to review, that price-based pricing model is that, it's looking at the category, understanding that category review, applying those retail margins to the prices that you see on the shelf, figuring out objectively where you fit. And that's a hard thing to do sometimes, but you got to really look and honestly say, okay, within this category, this is where we fit. Then setting your price, and then you've got to go back and compare it. How close is it to when you figured out that cost-based pricing that built based on your cost of goods and the profit that you need to generate in your business? So I told you need to sell to the retailer for $3.18. You may have said, well, when I worked it the other way, I got $4.50. So we have a gap. So that's what we have to work on and figure out. So is there a way to reduce your cost of goods? Is there a way to reduce something else? How do we get it? Or if you say, you know what, we can't do it for less than $4, then we need to say, okay, the retail price is going to be higher. How do we justify that on the shelf? How do we, what's the knock it out of the park promo strategy that's going to give us credit for being higher priced? Because if you go back to the retailer with a $4 selling price, your retail is going to be higher on the shelf. So that's what's going to happen. So it's so important to look at pricing from both sides, from look at that sort of cost-based model and then the price-based model. And it's really nice when it comes to the same number. That's, you can celebrate when that happens. So I'm going to cover a couple of just small points that often are questions that come up on pricing, and then we'll be happy to answer. And I know I see some questions popping up, and so we'll definitely get to those. So one thing people often ask me is, Peter, what about MSRP? What about a manufacturer's suggested retail price? So my answer to you is yes and no, or yes, but no. And I'm sure you're looking at going, oh, thanks for that answer, Peter. That's not much of an answer. So let me explain. So as far as that sort of MSRP, yes, it's your product, and you should know what the right price is. Yes, if you're trying to sell your products into specialty retailers, a lot of times they will ask you, what's the right price? You know, where should we be? And you need to have a really good answer for that. And then, yes, you need to do the work. And that's sort of that whole price-based pricing model, is to say, okay, what should it be priced at? Looking at the category and understanding it, because you do need to understand the category. It's not just your job to make it. It's also your job to understand how to sell it. So here's the no part. No, you don't control the retail price in the conventional retail channel. So you cannot tell Sobeys or Loblaws or Walmart how to price products. The retailers want to do it. And that's why I say no with the large retailers. They see that as their job to control retail pricing. And so you don't want to tell them how to do their job. And again, no, you can't tell them, but yes, you got to do the work. So yes, you should do all the work and try to understand what is the right price for your product. No, you shouldn't go into a category manager's office and say the right price is $6.99. If they ask you, that's awesome. Then you can explain the work you've done and say, based on that, we feel $6.99 is the right price. And that's awesome when you have that kind of relationship where they want to ask you that. They don't all want to ask it. So don't go in and try and tell them how to price your product, because they will, to be honest with you, get their back up. So as we're talking about all this, there's a lot of overlap and with what we're going to do next week as well. And I'm excited about our session next week, which is, so now you're on the shelf, what now? And it's a great accomplishment. We should all celebrate when we get a listing or when we get a chance to get on the shelf. But it's a huge thing about, okay, what are we going to do now? Because we're here, we've got to sell. And as I told you earlier, sales are what keep you on the shelf. So we're going to talk a lot next week about trade spend, and we're going to talk about how to build that plan that will allow you to stay on the shelf and keep your listings and be successful within that environment. And it's a little bit, you always hear the analogy about when the dog chases the car, and when they finally catch the car, what do they do with it? So getting on the shelf, it can't be like that for you. You have to have a great plan. You got to be ready to execute. So when you get on the shelf and as you grow your business, and if you get a new customer, what's the plan for that one, and that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about a lot of those components next week. So I'm really excited about that. And one of the things I wanted to leave you with, sort of to think about for next week, is we've got, according to Nielsen, 36% of sales. So that's more than a third of the sales, the dollar sales, and 48% of the tonnage. So nearly half of the volume going through these grocery stores are at what's called a temporary price reduction. So that means it's either an in-store, or it's a flyer, it's a loyalty program. There's something being done with that item. And that's why it's so important to have that plan so that you can work within your category and be successful at it. So that's what we're going to talk about next week, and spend some time really focusing on it. So just to recap for today, we talked a little bit about that market-based pricing for commodities. We talked about the cost-based pricing that was covered in Pricing 2.0. And again, there's some tremendous information in that session last week. I loved the thing about the cost of discounting and that kind of thing. And I probably would have covered that myself this week, but Gary did a great job on it. So I would really encourage you to spend some time on that. Today, we talked about that price-based pricing model, about looking at the category, doing that review, understanding those retail margins that your customer is going to need to make, being frustrated about it. I get that, but it is what it is. They got to run their business, and then trying to look and say, okay, what should the right price be to those customers? So that's how we went through that model, and again, a lot of art and a lot of science to get to that right price for your products. So Emily, we can take some questions, and I know we also want to talk a little bit about the minister's digital series as well. So I'll advance it to that slide, and then we can talk about that, and then we can answer some questions.
Yes, awesome. So I did put the link for next week's session in the chat. So if you want to join us again, Peter, thanks for doing the little intro to get a little taste for next week's session. The slide up on the screen now is the Minister of Agriculture's digital series. So this is usually a conference at this time of year, and we've pushed it digitally. So there's going to be 5 sessions there. The third one there, Consumer Trends in Agriculture, will actually be Peter and I again, but we will be switching seats a little bit, and there will be a couple other people on the panel. So be sure to go to Perennia's website and check out all the different titles and see what's going on in those sessions. And
yeah, I'm really looking forward to that session, Emily. I think we have yourself, we have Emily from Taste of Nova Scotia, Troy from Eden Valley, and Michael LeBlanc, who's a retail expert. So I think we've got a great panel of people who are going to share some really tremendous insights. And I'm looking forward to being the host and not doing as much talking, but it's a great series. It's hard to believe it's been a year since the Ministers' Conference last year, which was the last event that I had the privilege of speaking in person to. So, but I'm looking forward to that session on the 31st. And the other sessions I think are great too. There's a lot of good value for people.
Agreed, yes. So we have lots of questions here. This was obviously a hot topic. So we have some questions here, Peter, I'll walk you through. So the first one's a little bit more of a comment, but it said, it looks like the more perishable, the higher the margin. Grocery is such a huge category.
That's true. And really the way the retailers are looking at that is that there's more costs to running perishable departments. You have higher labor components, you have specialized fixtures, you have lower volume per square foot usually, and you have a more expensive supply chain. A lot of it involves refrigeration and that kind of thing. And grocery, in a sort of rough walking around number, grocery is usually about half of the sales. You know, it fluctuates depending on the banner, but it's about half of the volume in the store.
Yeah, it was a good comment there. Also, if you do have a question, please put it in now with the Q&A button, as we'll try and get to as many as we can. So the second one here, Peter, is where would I find the subcategories for grocery margins wise?
I would say that in most small to medium size businesses, I think you can probably use that 25 to 28 range. You can always ask your customer. I think it's, a very fair question to say, what are the margin expectations? Or another way you can phrase the question is, you can say, my understanding would be your margin expectations would be 28. Am I right or not? So I'm always a fan of sort of putting something out there. And even if the person doesn't give you the real number, they'll say, well, no, we'd be higher than that, or we'd be lower than that. So, that's probably, if you're getting that specific, so within a segment of grocery, you can, I think the best way is really probably to ask. Sometimes you can get a little bit of a hint from people in the stores. If you know some people, sometimes they might give you a little bit of a hint that, oh, we're paying this much for something. That's another way to do it.
Thank you. Next question is, sometimes I see the brand person replenishing the product and merchandising. Are these agreements that are a part of getting it onto the shelves to save some labor costs?
Right. So those are items which we would call DSD, so direct store delivery. And yes, that's part of the negotiation. A lot of times they are short shelf life, higher volume products. So we see dairy done that way. We see salty snacks like chips done that way. Pop is done that way. And it's different in different markets. In Atlantic Canada, we see that. In Western Canada, we actually see more of those products go through the retailer's distribution network. It just kind of depends on the capacity they have in their distribution networks. But a lot of times there are advantages if you can, if the cost makes sense. There are big advantages to be able to do direct store delivery because you're in the store, you see what's going on, you're not dependent on the retailer to put your product out and reorder properly and some of those kind of things. But it definitely is a different economic model. And if you are absorbing the cost of delivering it to the store, then you want to try to negotiate your price down a bit because you've got expenses that they don't have to incur.
I've definitely seen the Lay's guy there a couple of times stocking the chips aisle, and it's always very beautifully faced as well.
That's right. That's a great point, Emily. They do it differently than somebody who works for Sobeys or any of the retailers, right? Because they're paid, they're probably incentivized by the volume that they're doing through their stores. So they go in, it's all faced up, it looks good. I always think that'd be a great job. I might eat a lot of chips if I had that job, but I think that you can definitely argue that direct store delivery, it's more expensive, but there are advantages for as well.
Absolutely. This next question is a little targeted more towards me, but says food products to be sold in retail grocery, do products require a nutritional panel? And if it is being sold in the Atlantic provinces only, is it necessary to have bilingual packaging? And the answer to both is yes. So the only only place you're exempt from mandatory labeling in Canada is at the farmers markets. So as soon as you make that jump to retail, you have to have a nutrition facts panel, and it must be bilingual labeling for the bilingual mandatory labeling requirements. We do this at Perennia. This is one of the services we provide. So if you have any questions on that, that's my realm at Perennia, and feel free to get in contact with me. We do have some fact sheets on it as well that help explain that difference going from the farmers market to retail. But it's a little bit of a confusing one, but yes, definitely nutrition facts panel and bilingual once you're going to retail.
And one thing I'd add on that, Emily, and I'm 100% with your answer, is it's a great thing as you grow your business. If that's a step you're taking, you've got to instill confidence with your retail customers. So part of instilling confidence is bringing the right packaging, the right labeling to them, and don't expect them to kind of give you that kind of guidance or feedback or whatever. Yes, they probably know the regulations and everything, but their expectation is you're going to bring that to them done and the way that it should be. So I would concur 100% and get that help to get it the way it should be before you go to them.
I definitely agree with that, Peter. And one final question here, but we do have another minute or so. So if there's a burning question, please submit it now. But the last question waiting for us is there an expectation for providing shelf talkers and POP?
Mm-hmm. POP being point of purchase. And so that really depends on your customer. So in some of the retailers, they would say, absolutely not. We're putting our own signage up. You don't bring signage in unless we okay it. Other retailers would say, oh, great, you're willing to produce signage. And if you're going to put local on there and produce around here, then we're happy to put that in our store. So you want to ask the question with your customer. That's the best way to really know definitively whether they are in favor of that. And it's also a question that you should not think if you ask it once that you always know the answer, because retailers change. People, they're run by people, and sometimes the person making the decision is like, absolutely not, we're not going to put anybody's signage up, it's our customer, we're going to communicate with them. Then you could have a change of people and they go, oh, we really want to have more of a local flavor, we want to have more of a sort of action going on in our store, we don't want it to be such a sterile environment, we want to see some vendor signage. So ask your customer. Don't print 100,000 signs before you ask your customer. Ask the question and just make sure that you're on side. And a lot of times they do welcome it. Just depends on the retailer.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for knowing that acronym.
Oh, we love the acronyms, right? I was doing some work the other day on something, and it's like, FOB and all these different acronyms, which we love to throw out there. DSD is another one, which I always have to remind myself, make sure that I explain it so that people know.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Peter. That's the end of our questions. So thanks for presenting today. And this is the 6th out of 8 webinar for this series. Join Peter and I again next Wednesday for the So You're on the Shelf What Now session. The registration link for that is in the chat. I also put the YouTube playlist that has all the recordings for this series. So if you missed any or want to rewatch any of them, they're all in the YouTube playlist, including this one will go up after today. And other than that, we will hope to see you next week and have an excellent day.